Conversation with the Candidate continues.
Thank you for clicking on our extended Conversation with the Candidate with Democratic presidential candidate Marianne Williamson. We're going to get right back into the questions, and we're going to start with Grayson Brocklebeck.
Hi, thank you for taking the time to answer our questions today. In my own research that I've done, I've noticed that your campaign is based a lot on some abstract thoughts and ideas.
Sorry, my campaign is what, sir?
Your campaign is based on a lot of abstract ideologies. I was just curious as to what are some concrete steps you plan on taking to translate your emotionally based or abstract-based campaign into real-world success.
I actually don't think that my campaign is based on abstraction at all. If you look at my website, if you look at my issue section, I think I have a greater articulation of specific policy prescriptions than pretty much any candidate. One of the things I want to do is to establish a cabinet-level U.S. Department of Children and Youth. We have millions of American children who are living in chronic trauma. Many of them go to schools that don't even have minimum safety requirement standards met. They go to schools and classrooms where there are not the minimum school supplies necessary to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot read by the age of 8, the chances of his or her high school graduation is drastically decreased, and the chances of his or her incarceration someday are drastically increased. One of the things I've talked about here in New Hampshire, where the opioid crisis is so severe, it will do no good to just treat opioid addiction if we do not face the problem that with every child that is neglected, abandoned, underserved, undereducated, and undercared for, we are adding to the risk of creating new generations of opioid addicts. So we have to deal with the fact on the level of childhood where it all happens. Psychologists now tell us, neurologists talk about the neuroplasticity in the brain, talk about cognitive retention and the ability of cognitive abilities. We have to get to these children. This is very practical. So I don't just talk about love. I talk about what you're going to do for the children to display your love. I don't just talk about love. I talk about the fact that we need to wage peace. We need to expand economic opportunities for women. This is not new. I'm not just a philosopher. I am someone whose work having founded AIDS organizations, having founded peace organizations, and having worked on anti-poverty efforts throughout my adult career. I'm a very practical woman. I don't just talk. You don't see me in cut velvet. You know, I'm not just pink paint and crystals. I'm into getting things done, and I would get things done according to these values as your president.
Thank you, Grayson.
Thank you.
And we'll get you a little bit more water there, Ms. Williamson.
Sorry about this.
No problem. But talk a little bit about that. I'm very intrigued by the AIDS activism you did.
Yes.
Talk about how you decided to get involved there. I'm sure you were living in Southern California, so an epicenter of the early AIDS crisis. But what motivated you to do something?
It was 1983 when I began lecturing. And very shortly after I began lecturing, the AIDS crisis burst onto the scene, and Los Angeles was particularly hard hit. Western medicine, and I'm not saying they weren't trying, but as those of you who are around remember, it took a while before they kept playing cards, and it took a while before they had anything to offer. You were diagnosed with the virus, and that was for quite a while an automatic death sentence. It also, I'm afraid, took a while for the organized religious institutions to say much either. They had some things to obviously work through. I, however, was a then young woman talking about a God who loves you no matter what, and about how love works miracles. So in a very real way, gay men in Los Angeles gave me my career, because there was flocking to this then young woman who was having a conversation about how the whole point of love is to love each other and to be there for each other. That's, as I was saying to you, sir, it's not just talk. You know, a spiritual conversation that doesn't include caring for the suffering of other human beings and other species is a love that's just really a rebranded narcissism. So that is what happened in Los Angeles at this time. We started an organization called the LA Center for Living, then had a Manhattan Center for Living as well. And that gave free non-medical support services to people living with AIDS and other life-challenging illnesses. What happened was that guys, let's say, and some women as well, who had been diagnosed with AIDS, and in some cases it was other life-challenging illnesses, would come to the house and they could get fed, and they would have therapy groups, and they would get massages, and they would hang around and watch movies with other people. They didn't have to go through this experience alone. And then one day, I came and I said, well, where's David? And they said, well, David couldn't leave the house. And I went, oh, okay. Next day I come, where's Mark? Well, Mark couldn't come here today, couldn't leave the house. And I started asking, well, how are they going to eat? Who's going to feed them if they were eating here? And I remember when I was told, well, you know, we don't know. So, well, we have to pack up food and take it to them. And then there were so many Marks and so many Davids that we started a Meals on Wheels type program called Project Angel Food. And I'm proud to say that as of today, Project Angel Food has served over 11 million meals to people in the Los Angeles area, not only with AIDS, but fortunately, because that situation has improved, thank God, there are still so many people homebound, dealing not only with AIDS, but other life-challenging illnesses, for whom it's not only the food that is brought, but the love that is brought into their lives every day.
A social media question coming from Instagram, and Corey Burns Birchner. He asks, do you support abortion and late-term abortion?
You know, I believe that abortion is a deeply moral issue, but I believe that it is an issue of private morality. So it's not a fair question, do you support abortion? The issue is, do I support abortion rights? That's a very separate issue. I believe that there are issues of private morality and there are issues of public morality. And I believe that abortion is an issue of private morality. Other than the injunction against sex with children, which is universal and I think we'd all agree with, except for that one, I do not believe the government should be telling people what to do with their bodies, what they must do or what they must not do. I also believe it's a moral issue to consider what the situation was like with abortion in the United States before Roe v. Wade. I have a friend whose mother died when he was 15 because of the consequences of a botched abortion that she had had years before. Let's be very clear. If we're going to talk morality, what is this morality? You overturn Roe v. Wade and rich women in America will continue to have safe abortions, and women who are not rich will go back to the dangerous situations that used to mark that situation. To me, that's a moral issue as well.
Another social media question. Anna Curran asks, do you approve of illegal immigrants being allowed to vote?
Being allowed to vote?
To vote in elections.
No.
Okay, looks like another, actually we have Carolyn Moore, one of our regular questions here. Thank you, Carol, for coming, Carolyn, and coming down, and here's Marianne.
Thank you.
New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Medicaid Part 4 prescription drugs says that you cannot negotiate with the drug companies. If that is repealed, how would that affect the rest of Part D?
The rest of what?
Medicaid Part D.
I'm sorry, ma'am, Medicaid.
The Medicare.
Medicare and Medicaid.
Tremendously.
Medicare. Tremendously. Once this is a cap that has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that our government does more to advocate for short-term profits for multinational corporate conglomerates, in this case, Big Pharma, rather than for the people of the United States. There are people in this country, as we know, who are dying because they cannot afford their insulin. There are drugs in the United States that cost multiple times more than they cost in other countries for no other reason than the price gouging by Big Pharma and the fact that the United States government is willing to go along. This all has to do with the nefarious influence of what's called dark money in this country. The fact that particularly since the Civil Rights, Citizens United decision, unlimited amounts of corporate money are poured into our system. And I think it's important for us, the American people, to realize there is a common thread here. It's the same thing going on when you see something like the fact that we didn't ground when these tragic airline crashes happened with the Boeing MAX, right? So China immediately grounded those planes. European nations started immediately grounding those planes. All advanced nations immediately grounding those planes. We were very late at it. Why is it? Well, it's because the president of Boeing called, chairman of Boeing called the president, and Boeing had paid $15 million. $15 million in lobbying the U.S. government this year alone. This is how it works. So we need to do more than just deal with where the American people are being wronged in relation to drug prices, where the American people are being wronged in relation to so many other areas, including even the possible compromise of our safety. I mean, we finally grounded those planes, but notice how it took us longer. And that is what I think we all need to awaken to. It's not just one area, it's across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Part of being a good host is being ready. I've got a cough drop for you here if you need it. One person we haven't talked about yet is the President of the United States, who
Yes.
you'd be running against if you're the nominee. If you are the nominee, how would you run against Donald Trump to defeat him?
I do not believe that the American people need me to tell them who the president is. You don't need me to tell you what you already know. It is my job as a nominee, as a candidate, to articulate for you a vision of America that I feel is far more American and far more beautiful. I believe that this presidency has been an unfortunate episode in our nation's history. And I would like to complete it and get on with the work of our being the country that is who we need to be, who stands by our democratic values, who reclaims our own human values at a deeper level. America can have all the money in the world, America can have all the military might in the world, but if we lose our goodness, John F. Kennedy said, we cannot afford to be materially rich but spiritually poor. There is so much going on now that is mean-spirited. Our immigration policies are mean-spirited. When we have an EPA, an Environmental Protection Agency, that has gutted the Clean Water Act, gutted the Clean Air Act, that has overturned the, the ban on pesticides that we know harm a child's brain. When you have chemical lobbyists and oil lobbyists as heading your Environmental Protection Agency, when the Environmental Protection Agency was created to protect us from the overreach by such forces. When you have your first Secretary of State, not a great humanitarian or great diplomat, but rather someone who was the ex-CEO of Exxon. When you have the acting director of your Defense Department, a man who was a 30-year executive at Boeing. What we've got, ladies and gentlemen, is not a covert corporate takeover of the U.S. government. We have an overt corporate takeover of the U.S. government. I'm offering another option.
So if you don't mind taking your candidate hat off for a second, if you were able to sit down with Donald Trump in a room and be a teacher, of your teachings, what would you try to communicate to him if you had, say, 5 or 10 minutes?
I see the president as someone with whom the personality level is not the most beneficial level of communication. I would probably silently pray for him.
Okay. Another social media question here. We have Cliff King asking, how does she justify wanting to change this great country into a socialist experiment, considering that socialism has failed in every country it has been attempted? The conservatives weighing in.
Well, that's like, when was the last time you beat your wife? I believe in capitalism with a conscience. I've never, you know, first of all, these labels are kind of silly now. What do you think the police department is, if not a socialist situation, or the fire department is socialist? But I think of myself as someone who's for capitalism with a conscience. When I grew up, and that's why I think those of us old enough, we need to remind younger people it wasn't always this way. When I grew up, the social contract was such that we expected a corporation to have more than just fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders. The corporation was expected to have moral and ethical responsibility to its workers and to the environment and to the community. So this way that capitalism, you know, capitalism can have a high side as well, but nothing can have a high side that does not have ethical standards. So the fact that it has swerved from its ethical core is what needs to change. There are stakeholders that go beyond stockholders. Now, I also believe that there are some very powerful capitalist corporate leaders in America who know this. There's a famous industrialist from Italy who said a quote that I think is great. He said, if we want things to stay the same around here, some things are going to have to change. So I believe that there are many responsible corporate leaders in the United States who know that this thing has gone too far, it's unsustainable, it's wrong, and they would find in me a welcome partner in making changes, but they would also find me very tough in the places where those changes are not being made. I'm not for the corporate subsidies to multinational corporate conglomerates that already have all the money. I would definitely want to repeal those tax cuts. I think the idea of organizing our society and organizing even our economy according to market forces, untethered to any ethical principles, is completely to be off the table. But that's human ethics that have gone wrong there, not necessarily capitalism itself. So this capitalism, socialism conversation has become silly and also a distraction from what we need to be most concerned with.
What is the root cause, do you believe, of that swerving away from a kind of corporate conscience?
You know, we have a kind of whole systems breakdown, don't we? On one hand, we can say, well, we have been chronically disengaged from the political process, and that has allowed so many of these things to continue. We can talk about the fact that starting in 1980, this was an economic philosophy that was introduced. In 1980, it took hold, this idea of trickle-down economics, and the idea was that if you gave just all the money and all the ability to these small corporate forces and untether them from any kind of regulation, any kind of government interference, then that is the way to organize society. We've had 40 years to see what that has done. It has devastated the American middle class, and it has created the greatest income inequality since 1929. But this is also what's very interesting. The main architect, first of all, it's to be noted that the primary architect of free market capitalism, Adam Smith, said that no free market capitalism will work outside an ethical context. But it's also interesting to note that Milton Friedman, the primary architect of this whole trickle-down economic theory, he himself supported a form of universal basic income. Because he himself said, if you're going to release the market like that, you also got to protect the people. So the economic system that we've had has put so many people in survival mode, that sometimes too many millions of Americans are living with such anxiety, economic anxiety. What am I going to do if I get sick? What am I going to do if one of my children gets sick? How am I going to send my kids to college? How am I going to pay off these college loans? That sometimes we're not at our best when we're in survival. We don't even feel we have time to spend the time listening to our children. We are forced, too many people in America, forced too much into a situation where they've got to think about what to get as opposed to the more important things. But this is just one more area. No socioeconomic group of Americans has a monopoly on values. Not every rich person is greedy. Not every poor person is noble and pure. We all have to return to the goodness in our hearts, as well as making sure we return to the goodness of our economic system and the U.S. government.
And while we're in this vein, you were one of the first candidates to come out and speak publicly about reparations for slavery.
Yes.
Can you explain how your plan would work and how much you're willing to spend?
I believe that in order for this country to transform, we must apply moral and spiritual values. And a universal spiritual value is that you must admit the exact nature of your wrong, whether it's Catholics going to confession, whether it's Jews on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, or 12-step recovery groups where they talk about taking a fearless moral inventory, admitting the exact nature of your character defects. Abraham Lincoln in 1864 wrote a proclamation, a day of fasting and prayer, where he said that a country too must confess its sins. We have a national character defect that has been with us from the beginning, and that is racism. Now, I do not believe that the average American is a racist. I do not. But I do believe that the average American is undereducated about the real history of race in the United States, particularly since the Civil War. I think most Americans might not realize, and I do think this would have been different had Abraham Lincoln lived. At the end of the Civil War, Tecumseh Sherman, General Tecumseh Sherman, promised to every former slave family of 4, a phrase we've all heard, but not really perhaps thought deeply what it meant, 40 acres and a mule. Now think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say you've kicked somebody to the ground, and let's be clear, 2.5 centuries of slavery is definitely kicking someone to the ground. You have a moral responsibility in my mind, and I'm sure in yours, to do 2 things. Number 1, to stop kicking, but also to say, here, let me help you get back up. So as Martin Luther King would say 100 years later, they were freed, but what were they freed to? With that 40 acres and a mule, you're a former slave. You certainly have a skill set. You've been running other people's plantations. Those 40 acres and a mule would give you a chance to be integrated economically into the new condition of freedom. That's not what happened. In most cases, once again, had Lincoln lived, it would have been different, I believe. In most cases, the acreage was not given, and even where it was given, in most of those cases, it was taken back. And that was then followed, once the federal troops left in 1877, that situation was followed by Southern legislatures passing what were called the Black Code Laws. Black Code Laws ensured subpar economic and social and political opportunity for black people. After that, you have your spate of lynchings. This was domestic terrorism, ladies and gentlemen. Ku Klux Klan, that's domestic terrorism. Lynchings, domestic terrorism. But so then you've got the war over in 1865. You've got the federal troops that were stationed to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted. They left in 1877. By the year 1900, you had full-on institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South. That was not fundamentally addressed until Martin Luther King in the 1960s. So you have 2.5 centuries of slavery and then another 100 years of institutionalized violence. With the Civil Rights Movement, with the Civil Rights Act in 1864, they did, and we shouldn't minimize or undervalue the sacrifices and the struggles of our ancestors, black or white. This was extraordinary what they did. In 1964, the passage of the Civil Rights Act dismantled the externalities of segregation. And in 1965, the Voting Rights Act ensured free and equal voting opportunities for blacks. It's also worth noting, ladies and gentlemen, that in 2013, our Supreme Court began chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, which is why all these voter suppression efforts have occurred throughout the country. So in other words, we abolished slavery, we dismantled segregation, and we gave equal voting rights, although we started to compromise there. What we never did was address the economic gap that began with the end of the Civil War and has never been able to close. We now have a situation where if you're a genius, if you're a, Tyler Perry or Magic Johnson, then you're going to make it no matter who you are in America if you're enough of a genius. That of itself is not economic justice. The nation of Germany has paid since World War II $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations. Obviously, this can't make the Holocaust not have happened, but those reparations have gone far towards reconciling Germany with the Jews of Germany and the rest of Europe. So you've got, that war was over in 1945, and you've got a young generation of Germans who aren't carrying this toxicity on and on and on. Our war was over in 1865, and we are still carrying this because it's time to take the next big step. And that is why I believe we should have reparations for slavery. It won't make slavery not have happened. This is an issue where we must address external and internal issues. But there is such great moral force, spiritual power. We need more than just random acts of kindness now. We need to do huge strategized acts of doing the right thing. America's done great things before. This is time for us to now take the next great step. And reparations implies an apology at a deeper level than just I'm sorry. So there could be a council of black leaders, and that today means American descendants of slaves. And choosing those people would be a huge issue. You have great black scholars who have worked seriously on this issue, as well as leaders in culture and academia and politics, et cetera. And the number would be negotiated, of course, and then over a period of, let's say, 20 years, it would be dispersed and applied as this council chose for projects of economic and educational renewal among American descendants of slaves.
So more specifically, you're talking about schools and economic development rather than direct payments?
Well, there are a couple of ways. There are two things to remember. First of all, if I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. On the other hand, the U.S. government would be handing over a lot of money, and we would certainly have the right to have some minimum stipulation. And yes, that has to do with economic and educational renewal, projects of economic and educational renewal. That's why the selection of this council would be a very significant process that I hope all Americans would consider themselves
So
part
just
of.
specifically, it wouldn't be individually targeted, because certainly there are situations that are fraught here, because you could have a black African who is not a descendant of slaves, who suffers racism as well.
Yes, but these days there is a lot of talk about ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves. So that is to be honored, and this would have to do with people who are American descendants of slaves, not an immigrant from Nigeria, let's say.
Okay, and not to belabor the point, but 23andMe is teaching us all sorts of, Ancestry.com, that there are people who would probably otherwise be identified as white and have not suffered from racism, but they may have descended from someone who is a slave. Would they be eligible in some way, even if they are not ethnically black?
That wouldn't be for you and me to decide.
the council. Okay, let's get back to healthcare. Amy Flanders Eastman asks.
I'm sitting here holding this thing because I don't want to talk to you with my mouth full. So let's just admit
get some water. This is a long
unfair.
question, so it can help you here. Amy Flanders Eastman says, before Obamacare became law, my husband had good health insurance through his employer. But when Obamacare became law and my husband's employer could no longer afford the premiums, my husband lost his health insurance and we can't afford to pay out of pocket. So my husband and millions like him have to go without health care. My question is, how will you improve our so-called health care system and make it available and fair for everyone?
Unfortunately, we've all heard that story before. It was clearly not a perfect system. We can talk about those who designed it. It helped many, many people. And unfortunately, there are people like that person. I am for some version of a Medicare for all. Medicare works. Let's just, you know, one of the things that I would see as a bulwark of my presidency, I want to unleash, take the shackles off the American people so that they can produce, so that you can be there for your family, so that you can create, so that you can be productive members of society. Americans are just like so burdened. And one of the things that burdens us too much is everything is too complicated. I don't want complicated. I want, you're sick, you go to the doctor, it's handled, get back to your life. And also, I'll tell you something else. We have we call it health care, but we have more of a sickness care system than we have a health care system. In my presidency, we'd have a health care system. We'd be looking at a lot of issues of health, including our environmental policies, our agricultural policies, our chemical policies, and so forth. We need a far more expanded. You know, so much of our politics today, so much of the dominant political conversations are stuck somewhere in the 1980s, 1990s. This is 2019. The American people have gone further, and so should the American government.
Okay, another social media question. This one's a little bit lighter hearted. Mark Norris asks, will she have a dog as a pet if she becomes president?
You know, it's interesting you say that. Somebody came up to me at a party recently. She said, you know, I told Mitt Romney he would have won if they just had a dog, and the American people were very turned off by that dog on the top. You got to get a dog, Marion. You got to get a dog. Got to get a dog. And I'm not going to get a dog because I think you'll love me more. No, I travel a lot. You know, you travel a lot when you're, in the White House, would I? As a child, we had dogs, but as an adult, we've had cats.
Okay, so a first cat, then.
I don't know. I think I'm more of a cat person.
Staying in this realm, I guess, not pets necessarily, but fun and interesting questions. Who do you believe is the most spiritually enlightened president? And I'm going to make this hard for you. You can't say President Obama or President Lincoln.
Oh, I can't say Lincoln?
Nope, sorry. I'm taking away the easy ones for Democrats.
How can you ask me that and then tell me that I can't say
Lincoln? Yeah, just go down the list.
You know, I have a... We can talk about, you know, we can talk about one person whose views were so enlightened on this, and then whose life was not enlightened on that. You know, you can talk about the fact that the founders themselves infused our Declaration of Independence with the most enlightened principles that had ever infused and ever have infused the founding of any country, and yet 41 of them were slave owners. So I think that what's significant to me, and the older I get, the more I know this, the older I get, the more you realize, we all have within us the demons and the angels. We all have within us the worst and the best, and so did every president of the United States. We're not running for sainthood here, are we? We're running for someone who you believe stands not just on the best people, because I think good people are running, but on the values that you feel should infuse the behavior of the presidency. And I would certainly try my best.
That duality has defined not just this presidency, but the country in general.
That's the point.
And this is what you would attempt to resolve.
With the worst face of America. That is the problem in America today. We are leading with the worst face. We need to lead with our best.
Okay, Marianne Williamson, we very much appreciate your time here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for a conversation with the candidate. We want to thank our studio audience and the great town hall questions that we received, and we want to thank everyone watching online and on our mobile app. Tune in again next week. We will have Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is exploring a run for presidency on the Republican side of things. But until then, we'll see you. Thank you again to Ms. Williamson, and thank you
so
to
much.
everyone watching.
Thank you. Thank you. Y'all have a great day.